Week we discussed please feel free to continue your breakfast. Last week we discussed the three prayers, how they are a reflection of the characteristic traits and the spiritual composition of our forefathers Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and how each one of the prayers was intimately associated with them, with their objective in life, and with their purpose and their way, their style, their individual style that they served the Almighty God, and how it relates to the differing parts of our lives, the dawn part of our lives, the middle part of our lives, the end, times of doubt and uncertainty, times of exile, difficult times when things are going good, etc., in the middle of the day when things are beginning to change, etc. Now we're going to discuss the second part of the basis for our prayers, and that is, as the Talmud says, that the prayers are based upon the service of the temple. The Tamid Shel Shahar, the Tamid Shel Harba'im, the continual Olah sacrifice, the elevated sacrifice that was brought up in the temple and in the tabernacle, that has great symbolism, and they are corresponding to Shahrit and Minha, and the fact that the parts of the sacrificial components of the animal was permitted to be burnt on the altar for the rest of the night, that corresponds to the evening prayer. So let us first commence and begin to understand a little bit the function and the purpose of the Mishkan, the tabernacle and the temple, what it's all about. The Torah says, after the Jewish people sinned with the sin of the golden calf, and Moshe Rabbeinu asked of Hashem to forgive the Jewish people, the Almighty, subsequent to that, as a sign of affection and love for the Jewish people, said, "Ve'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham," make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell within them. Which means to say that the Almighty commanded the Jewish people to make a holy place, a place by which the divine presence rests, a place that is holy and distinct from the mundane, from the physical, something spiritual, something holy, by which the divine presence resides, is felt, is real, is tangible, so to speak. Although this was to be in every single Jew, in every single dimension where a Jew lives prior to the sin, but that divine presence began to be somewhat limited because of the sin of the golden calf. But nonetheless, from here we see that the function of the tabernacle is to cause the divine presence to rest in this world, to be revealed in this world. For godliness is hidden, godliness is concealed, and the objective of the tabernacle is to cause godliness to be felt, real, relevant, and revealed. How is this so? By taking all of the physical components of this world and offering it as a sacrifice to Hashem. Let us stop for one moment and understand exactly what happened in the tabernacle. The tabernacle, it says, was made of atzeh shittim, of acacia wood, particular type of wood. Shittim shares the word shtut, or folly, and the Gemara tells us, "En adam hoteh ela im nichnas bo ruach shtut." A person does not sin only if the spirit of folly overtakes him. What does it mean, the spirit of folly? It means to say that the world and the materialism of the world and our desires and our pleasures belies or allows us to see the facade of the world and not the godly spark that enlivens everything. And then instead of our soul thirsting for the divine soul, which it does, the divine spark that exists within everything, the body tends to veer or to desire or thirst for the material aspect or the facade or the external aspect of creation of the world. In other words, everything in this world has two components, a physical component and a spiritual component. The material side of us, the body, desires the material aspect of it. It naturally veers and tends towards the material things of it. The soul naturally veers and tends and desires and thirsts for the spiritual component that exists and enlivens everything. However, this world, the way we see it and the way we look at it, is that we see the materialism, we readily appreciate, feel, touch, smell, see the material dimension of things, and it becomes very easy to become carried away with the materialism of the world, as opposed to dig deep and see the spiritual dimension and the purpose of why God created the world. And therefore, comes the Mishkan to realign our focus, and that is to feel the divine presence. And how do we feel the divine presence? By creating a tabernacle, of which the tabernacle was made of acacia wood, atzeh shittim. Shittim means to say, as we mentioned before, folly, overturning the folly. In other words, looking beyond the folly, looking beyond the facade, and then thus using and utilizing and tapping into the spiritual resources that exist within every material thing and reconnecting it to its source. So, for example, we discussed before that the Almighty, when He created the world, created a mechanism what's called Siddur Ishtalshalut, the order of descent, by which God had to, so to speak, contract Himself, conceal Himself. For if godliness, if this world was created by immediate and direct divine light, without it being contracted and concealed, we would not be physical entities, we would be spiritual entities, we would not have free choice, we would not have physical tendencies. And thus, the divine intent by which godliness would permeate even the darkest corners or the lowest components of physicality would not be able to be realized. And therefore the Almighty created a system of order of descent by which the Almighty conceals Himself and further conceals Himself and further conceals Himself until material world is created. Everything in this material world has a spiritual source. The objective of our existence in this world is to bring godly light to every physical dimension, to penetrate it, to impregnate it, and to be able to uplift it and return it back to its soul, and in fact, in many ways, even higher than its original source. And therefore, in the tabernacle and in the temple, by extension, later on in the temple, the tabernacle existed prior to the temple being built. There were certain services, the services of the sacrifices. There was an altar, there was incense, there was different components that were used, particularly in the vegetable kingdom, wine, water for wine libation, there was flour used as sacrifices, there were birds, and there were animals. And the function of bringing these sacrifices was to tap in to the spiritual component of all of these elements, the inanimate being water, and the vegetable being the flour and the different spices that was used. The animal kingdom being the animals that were brought on the sacrifice, on the altar of sacrifice. And the human component being involved in the sacrifice themselves and viewing himself and seeing himself as the sacrifice himself. In other words, him being, the sacrifice being a representative, him himself, so to speak. And thus, the function of the tabernacle was to uplift everything to its spiritual source. As we mentioned, part of the service, or the components of the tabernacle, was the tabernacle itself, the construction of the tabernacle made out of these wood. Kedesh, in Hebrew, Kedesh, wood, also has the same word as sheker, which means falsehood. Because in this world is the world, as the Gemara tells us in Masechet Brachot, this world is predominantly the world of falsehood, of sheker. Alma de Shikra, it's called, world of falsehood. Why is this called world of falsehood? Because it misrepresents the truth. The world is not independent. the physical matter is not the real essence of existence. There's a spiritual component, and that we are totally dependent upon godliness, but we don't feel it and we don't see it. We can only think and ponder and understand that to be the case, but we don't feel and see it to be the case, and therefore it doesn't come easy to us. If we were to just look at materialism, we would only appreciate the material side of things. That is sheker, that is falsehood, that belies the truth. That's part and parcel of the challenge of this world. It's part and parcel of bringing down godliness in every dimension, in the darkest dimensions of this physical existence. That's the divine intent. But it takes effort. It takes meditation, it takes thinking. And the point of the Bet HaMikdash was to take the sheker, as is symbolized, sheker means falsehood, as is symbolized by the word keresh, which means wood. And don't forget, there had to be wood that was brought on the altar to burn the sacrifices. That in itself is a service for itself, as we will discuss in a minute. And to turn it into kesher. The word keresh, sheker, and kesher all share the same three letters, just in different order. The objective of the tabernacle is to be able to make a kesher with God, to overturn the falsehood, the sheker, and to make a kesher, a connection with God, and to connect ourselves and everything that our human existence involves and surrounds our lives, the food that we eat, and the world that we tread on, the earth that we tread on, the water that we drink, and all of our existence and our mentality should be directed towards God and make a kesher, make a solid connection. And here lies the big difference between Torah and tefillah and prayer. Because in the Bet HaMikdash, it's called Avodat HaKorbanot, the work or the service of the sacrifices. The word sacrifice, korban, has the root, or shares the root, karev, which means to come close. So the whole function of the sacrifices is to bring everything about us, everything that we are involved with, everything that we are associated with, karev, close, karov, close to God. That is the function. Even though that this was primarily the function of the tabernacle and the temple, but it exists within every single individual as well. We know that Meloch ha'aretz kevodo, the Almighty, fills the whole world with His glory. There is leit atar panui minei. It says in Kabbalistic writing, leit atar panui minei. There is no place that is devoid of godliness. God fills every aspect of creation. In fact, I like to explain it in a way that we exist within God's consciousness. Not that God exists in our world, but we exist in His world, so to speak. It's a different way of looking at it. We exist in His consciousness. We exist in His light. Not that there is a world. God created a world, and He impregnates the world and He enlivens the world. Of course, the Gemara does say this, that just as the soul enlivens and exists within the body, so too godliness exists and enlivens within the world. But that is really within the function of the fact that we exist totally within the consciousness of God and God's light. So the fact that God's presence exists everywhere does not exclude the fact that holiness and godliness and spirituality can be found everywhere. The fact that there is a tabernacle and a temple is where a place that is singled out to be holy, a place of meditation, a place of sanctity, a place that is separated from the mundane and from the physical, a place where the divine presence is more real and tangible. However, by extension, says Al-Sheikh HaKadosh, Rabbi Moshe Al-Sheikh, which was one of the greatest scholars who lived in about 550 years ago in the city of Tzfat, at the same time as the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, as well as the great Kabbalist, the holy Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the holy Arizal. All of them are buried in Tzfat. All of them lived in the same town, and guess what? All of them prayed in the same synagogue. Can you imagine? You went to the same synagogue. The halachic authority, the rabbi, was Rabbi Yosef Karo. The Doresh, he who gave the Darush, the Drasha every week, was Rabbi Moshe Alshich. And then there was the Kabbalist, the Arizal. All of them prayed in the same synagogue all the time. Amazing. Amazing. The both two Sephardim, and the Arizal was half Sephardi, half Ashkenazi. His mother was Sephardi, his father was Ashkenazi. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, his name is. So let us continue. The Al-Sheikh HaKadosh says, as well as the Midrash says, Ve'asu li mikdash, make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell within them. Why does it say in them and not in it? Why plural? There was only one sanctuary. And he says, betoch kol ehad ve'ehad, or according in every single individual, the tabernacle, the concept of the tabernacle, the concept of the divine presence existing in every single one of us is possible. And according to another version, belibam shel kol ehad ve'ehad miYisrael, in the hearts of every single Jew. This is based upon a pasuk in Tehillim where David HaMelech says, Ohel shiken ba'adam, Ohel, the tabernacle, the tent of tabernacle, or the tent of meeting, which was many times called the tent of meeting, where Moshe Rabbeinu, so to speak, met the Almighty and had transmission and teachings from the Almighty to Moshe Rabbeinu, and then subsequent to the Jewish people. Or many times when Moshe Rabbeinu gathered the people, he gathered them around the tabernacle. So it was called Ohel. It was called the tent of tabernacle. David HaMelech says, Ohel, this tent, shiken ba'adam, he placed within man. Which means every concept and every function and every aspect of the Mishkan, be it the menorah and what it symbolizes, be it the altar and what it sacrifices, be it the wood, be it the animals that were brought as sacrifices, etc., all exists within man. Why is that? Because we are a microcosm of everything spiritual of the whole world, and particularly of the altar. Just as there is a holy place, so too there must be a holy place, an unadulterated place, something special, something unique, something that can never be damaged within every single one of us, a place within every single one of us, or a concept within every single one of us by which resides the divine presence. And we know that the concept of the divine name, and I'm not going to elaborate, just very briefly, the divine name of the tetragrammaton name, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, exists within every single one of us. We have, God forbid, the ability to sever that connection and not receive our sustenance directly from the divine flow that is generated through the divine name, which is the divine name is responsible for creation. But rather, God forbid, to receive what's called Hechalot HaTum'ah, for to receive it from the chambers or the palaces of impurity, a place of darkness, a place where godliness is very, very much hidden. In other words, we have the capacity to receive the divine energy directly from the divine flow, which emanates from the divine name, which is the Shekhinah, the divine presence, as particularly the last letter of God's name, the last Hey of God's name, is a symbolism of the divine presence of the Shekhinah, and that was the function of the Mishkan, to reveal the Shekhinah, to reveal the divine presence. And we have, God forbid, the ability to sever it, to sever that letter, that last letter of God's name, and that the transmission of God's flow and energy that enlivens us doesn't go directly anymore from the divine name. It goes through, unfortunately, we have the ability to bring it down to wrong channels, channels of impurity, and then receive our sustenance from that, and thus enhancing darkness in the world, impurity in the world, and godly concealment in the world. So we know, Kabbalistically speaking, that we have this dimension of the divine presence existing within ourselves. And the concept of elevating everything in the tabernacle and uplifting it to God and to its source exists within us as well. Because the word teshuvah, repentance, contains two concepts. Tashuv, return, hey. The last letter of God's name, that is the symbolism of the divine presence, the flow that goes down to this world and to us. We can sever it, God forbid, as we mentioned before, or we can reconnect. Shuvah reconnects us. Tashuv hey means to say that we are reconnecting that last letter of God's name that particularly enlivens this world, because we mentioned on previous occasions that there are 4 letters of God's name, and in general terms there are 4 worlds. The last world being our material physical world. And depending upon our actions, the divine flow will either flow through the divine name or not. And our objective is to connect or reconnect at least that last letter of God's name, making God's name whole, and thus causing revelation to be real and evident in this world. And that is the function of the tabernacle, and that is the function of every single one of us. Where there is no longer a tabernacle or a temple because of our sins that has been destroyed, we can find that concept within ourselves, and then, as was the case, was transplanted, as the Gemara tells us, was transplanted to a smaller degree to Mikdash Me'at, to the miniature or the microcosm of the temple in synagogues throughout the world. And therefore prayer is symbolized through the concept of avodah. Avodat tefillah, it's called the service of tefillah, the work or the toil of tefillah, of prayer, is a replacement and an extension of everything that had to be and was achieved and could be achieved through the tabernacle. Within ourselves and through the concept of prayer. Tefillah, as we mentioned before, the word tefillah means to connect. And that is the whole function of the Bet HaMikdash and the sanctuary and the tabernacle, etc. And for this reason, the second dimension of prayer, we discussed last week, the first dimension of prayer was connected to our forefathers that instituted that particular prayer during morning, afternoon, or evening. And the second dimension of prayer, particularly after the destruction of the temple, is to symbolize or to transplant all of the concepts of what the tabernacle represents, as we have discussed. And this is the big difference between Torah study and prayer. Torah study is different. There's a mitzvah of Torah study and there's a mitzvah of prayer, and they are very different. What does Torah study, what can it be compared to? The Gemara compares Torah study to water. Ma mayim yordim mimakom gavoa lemakom namuch. Torah yarda mimakom gavoa lemakom namuch. Torah is compared to water. Why is it compared to water? Because water comes from a high place and trickles down to a low place. Water is a gift from above. Water is exactly the way it is above as it is down below. In other words, when it rains and it comes down the mountains or however, or it comes down from the clouds or whatever, it's the same water down below as it is above. Unchanged. So the concept of Torah is God's gift to man. But prayer is compared to fire. It is man's gift to God. It is a service that comes from a different direction. Torah comes from above down below and penetrates our minds and our hearts and changes us. But it changes us from above down below. In other words, a transmission from above down below. There's another objective of our existence. And the other objective of our existence is the avodah, the service of the gift that we can give God from below to up above. And that is compared to fire. Why fire? Because the nature of fire is to go up. And fire cannot exist without something tangible holding that fire, that flame. The flame itself is the fire itself, the energy of fire is more of a spiritual thing. It's not as tangible as earth or trees or these different types of concepts, but it still needs a wick and it still needs oil for it to hold on to it, to exist. Where there is wick, where there is oil, and you light the flame, or you transfer a flame, or you create the flame and you pass it over to this wick, to this candle or to this oil wick, there begins to be a flame. And that flame is energized by the materialism of this world, but flickers up. And continually wants to go higher up, higher up. This is the gift that we can give God, so to speak, and that is predominantly through the aspect of the service in the temple, which was brought up on the altar, which was burnt, so to speak, and the fire, the passion that must be contained in our hearts in our service of prayer. And that's why it's compared to fire. We have a very interesting phenomenon in the temple, in the tabernacle, in the temple. That sages tell us, even though, miraculously speaking, there was a miracle that occurred in the tabernacle and in the first temple. It didn't occur, unfortunately, in the second temple. But in the first temple and in the tabernacle, there was a miracle that happened. And anybody who went and brought a sacrifice could see this miracle. And when you see a miracle, you go home a different person. That's the function of the tabernacle. You go to the tabernacle, you become a different person. So they would come to the tabernacle, and I would bring a sacrifice, and I would see, and the Kohanim would bring from the donations of the Jewish people. They would make a pier of wood, place the sacrifice on top, light the fire, place the sacrifice, and a fire came from above, showing that this sacrifice was accepted upon high, was pleasing to Hashem, so to speak. And the Gemara says, the sages tell us, even though that a fire comes from above to consume the sacrifice, technically speaking, do we need a fire? You don't need a fire. Why? Because the fire came and consumed it. Mitzvah lahavim min hayadiot, it's a mitzvah to bring the fire from us, from down below. Because the whole function, as we mentioned before, of the tabernacle is to give this gift to God. The fire and the passion that consumes the passion that exists in the materialism world. Take that passion, that we know what passion is, that we know what love to physical things and desires and pleasure to physical things. Take that and direct it to Hashem. That's a fire. That must exist in prayer. And this is the difference between the Torah that sensitizes us or spiritualizes us or refines us from above down below, from a gift from God, where every time we study Torah it refines us. And then the refining that we ourselves take. You know, how do you refine gold? How do you take impurities from anything? Even water? Through fire. You burn it and you consume the impurities that exist. So too, mitzvah lehavim min hayadiot, the sages tell us that it's a mitzvah to bring the fire from below, because that is the whole function and purpose of the tabernacle, and by extension, the concept of prayer, that there has to be a fire and a passion that burns and purges the falsehood, the animalistic drives and tendencies that we have. And that is symbolized by the animal. The animal that exists within us comes from the same source, from the same spiritual source. As we mentioned before, everything physical has a spiritual source. So this is then the second concept of prayer that corresponds to the tabernacle and to the service of the temple. Now, we will discuss a little bit of the authorship of the Siddur, or how the Siddur itself came to be, and hopefully by the grace of God, the next shiur will be in the Siddur itself, navigating the Siddur itself. What is the history of prayer? What is the history of Siddur? How does it work? The Siddur that we have today, the prayer book that we have today, how did it come about? Let us discover a little bit, just in short, a little bit of the history. In the first instance, In the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, everybody prayed to God, and everybody prayed to God in their own way, in their own word structure. People were on a much more higher spiritual plane. They were able to express themselves much better, and they were able to tap in to their spiritual side, to their poetic side, and express themselves much better, much more sincerely than later generations. And it's an obligation to pray to God, and everybody prayed to God when they felt a need, when they felt a lack, they turned to God in prayer. Certain individuals certainly the concept of 3 times prayers is not a new thing. David HaMelech in chapter 55 in Tehillim says, I pray to God and turn to Hashem in prayer in the Erev Avokim B'Tzahoraim, evening, morning and afternoon. We find a similar concept with Daniel. Daniel being, of course, a member of the Sanhedrin and a prophet who also prayed to Hashem 3 times. So there were particular individuals who prayed to God regularly every single time, 3 times a day, that David HaMelech, don't forget, existed before the temple but after the tabernacle. So borrowing from the concept of prayers instituted by our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, and connected to the service of the tabernacle, even whilst the tabernacle or the temple existed, there were individuals who prayed regularly. But the construct of the words, that was dependent upon every single individual. As time came, time moved on, and the first temple was destroyed, people began to become confused both in language, where the Jewish people were exiled to Babylon, for example, and thus we have the Babylonian Talmud. That was after the second temple, not the first temple, but where the Babylonian temple came to be, and it was written in Aramaic. That was the language that was spoken at the time. So there began to be a confusion of the language. Jews were exiled from the land and began to speak different languages, and therefore their ability to articulate in the Lashon HaKodesh and the Hebrew language began to become limited. Now the Hebrew language is not a language like other languages. It is a holy tongue. It is a language created by Hashem Himself. It is a language by which Hashem Himself created heaven and earth. It is a language by which Hashem expressed His Torah and mitzvot, through the language of the Bible, of the Hebrew language. And therefore, the language of the Hebrew is a very powerful one and contains a lot of light and a lot of inspiration and a lot of meaning. There are certain things that you can never translate in the Torah, in the Bible. You can never translate. It loses its meaning because it's translated into and describes a concept. But in Hebrew, the word itself comes to life. The word itself means what it is. It is what it is. In other words, the very letters create what it is. But with the advent of time, this began to become confused. And thus the sages Ezra and the Sanhedrin, the men of the great assembly, the great Beth Din, exactly what I was going to say, the great Beth Din, and in fact even more than that, it was the men Anshe Knesset Agdolah, the men of the great assembly, that was the Beth Din, the supreme Beth Din of 120 sages, including great sages, Kohanim, Leviim, and prophets. Amongst these sages, they began to construct a more formalized language to use in prayer. And it started with the 18 blessings, or what we know as the Amidah. The 18 blessings. Today we have 19 blessings. Later on we will learn that in the Gemara they added one more because there began to be many people who began to be minim, malshinim, people who became heretics, people who began to cause trouble and undermine Judaism, and because of their heretic beliefs, they informed wrongly or created libels or lies in order to be able to destroy the Jewish nation as a revenge or whatever. Or sometimes a person has an inner guilt when a person leaves something to be inwardly on or subconsciously knows it to be the truth. He rebels against it because that's the only way that he can justify subconsciously he's not doing the right thing. Like the Gemara tells us that the Maratzim, the ignorant people, would curse out the scholars. Why would they curse out the scholars? Why would you curse out the scholar? Because inwardly they were jealous of the scholars. They weren't scholars. So how do you express it? You can do it two ways. You can either honor the scholars and try and emulate them and learn from them and be around them, or rebel against them. That's a form, in a way, it's a form of envy. But it comes out in the negative. It can come out in a positive, comes out in the negative. So too as well, Shmuel HaKatan, because of the plague that plagued the Jewish people at that time, this was after the destruction of the second temple, added one more bracha because of this people that caused a lot of animosity. So the sages of Ezra and Anshe Knesset HaGdolah instituted many blessings of food, blessings of different types of blessings. Amongst them was the 18 blessings of the Amidah. And it was instituted that people pray these words and are not allowed to change them. It was called matbeah. Matbeah in Hebrew is something that is engraved. We call it in a coin. But why is it called a coin? It's called a coin because it's engraved. It's minted. In Hebrew, it comes from the word matbeah, tabua, something that you engrave. In other words, the sages minted this construct of prayer, and they chose these words very carefully to tap into spiritual levels and allow us to climb to spiritual heights through these words, because the words themselves are alive. In this regard, I want to say an interesting story. When you say the words are alive. About 150 years ago, the wicked Tsar Nikolai of the Romanov or something like that family. What's it called? Romanov. Oh, it was close. Same Hebrew letters. He was very wicked, and he tried to destroy the Jewish people. So what did he do? He made a decree, and the decree was that the Jewish people had to give up their children, or a certain amount of children at a young age, and that would bring them up as total, without any Judaism whatsoever. And when they would be old enough, they would enter the Tsar's army for about 25 years, and when they would leave, they would be already middle-aged, and by then he was sure that they would remember no Judaism whatsoever. They were called Cantonistim. And it was a very great bad decree amongst the Jewish people, caused a lot of havoc and suffering. And what happened was that they would hire people, pay people to go, that if the Jewish people did not give up their children willingly, who gives up their children willingly? No one. They would snatch them. They would actually snatch them, put them in a carriage, and many people lost their children that way. Many of these Cantonists they knew nothing, especially when they were very snatched at a very young age. What could they remember? Veli Shema Israel. A lot of these Cantonists, when they were finished their army service, came back to Judaism. One time, this story, I love this story because it just gives me a lot of passion and enthusiasm when I remind myself the story in prayer. And it's got to do with the concept of the Hebrew letters, how they are full of life and light. Holy Arizal says that it's once when you open the Torah, you know how we open the Torah on Shabbat? He says once you open the Torah, light emanates from it. And it's very important to try and find your letter. You know how we open the Torah and we say Vezot HaTorah Shesam Moshe, etc. And we point to it and we kiss it in whichever way, with our talit or with our fingers or hands or whatever the case may be. Arizal says it's try to find in the first verse your letter, connect your soul to the letters, because the letters of Torah emanate light. And indeed, that's the case. The Torah emanates light. The holy letters emanate light from it and have the ability to infuse us with spiritual fire and passion. And this story is very much connected to this. So one time this Cantonist, who wasn't educated in Judaism, knew nothing. He didn't even know the translation of the words. But he would pray with unbelievable enthusiasm, with such passion. You'd think that this guy was a great scholar or some tzaddik. And indeed he did. He prayed with such passion and fervor and sincerity that even scholars were jealous of him. And they would question him. And one questioned him and said, "Tell me, how do you pray with such beautiful enthusiasm and sincerity and passion when you don't even know the meaning of the words?" And he looked at him and he said, "What do I need the meaning of the words if I have the words themselves? I pray with the words." When I read this story, it just captivated my heart. Of course we should know what we're saying as much as possible, but the words themselves are holy, and if we can connect to the energy of the words, we can be enlivened by the words themselves. And this is the reason why the sages chose these words. These words have an ability, even though we may not understand them, we should surely try and understand them, at least a little bit of them, every time a little bit more. But we should allow ourselves to be enlivened by the words themselves, because the letters and the words themselves have fire and are able to uplift us and give us enthusiasm. So we're going to finish now because we've run out of time, but that is the beginning of the structure of the Siddur. By the grace of God, next year we'll finish this off, just how the Siddur came to be. It's not going to be long, and then we will begin the Siddur itself. We will start with Modeh Ani and the blessings of the morning.
Next week, you're not sure.